Wuthering Heights is often described as one of the greatest love stories of all time, which is fascinating considering how little love is actually on the page. This book isn't about devotion or sacrifice or choosing each other against all odds. It's more about obsession and power than it is about two lovers being kept apart by their differences in breeding and status. So today we're going to talk about why I don't believe that Wuthering Heights is a love story. This video is going to be broken up into 3 parts. First, we'll talk about why Wuthering Heights is not a love story at all. Second, if it's not a romance, then what is it? And third, why this distinction matters. Because misreading it as a romance does a novel a huge disservice. Before we get into it, I just want to also address this idea that the narration of this book is unreliable. Pretty much the entire book is like a secondhand or third-hand account of the events that supposedly transpired. For the sake of this video and for the sake of my sanity, we're going to assume that the events are all true and have not been exaggerated or altered in any way. Can we call what Heathcliff and Catherine feel for each other love? Are either of them capable of love at all? To really understand Heathcliff as a character, we have to first look at how his story got started. Obviously, we don't know anything about his life before he came to the Earnshaws. Once he's brought into the household, it becomes very clear that he's not welcome there. He experiences racism and classism and prejudice against him because of the way he looks and where he came from. And at the very worst, he receives a lot of physical abuse from Hindley from the very start. And Earnshaw, out of pity, begins to spoil Heathcliff, while criticizing and neglecting his other children constantly. Heathcliff very early on in his life learns, in order to survive, he has to manipulate the people around him. Early on in the book, we learn about an incident between Heathcliff, Hindley, and a pair of colts that were given to them as a gift from their father. He was not insolent to his benefactor. He was simply insensible, though knowing perfectly the hold he had on his heart, and conscious he had only to speak and all the house would be obliged to bend to his wishes. As an instance, I remember Mr. Earnshaw once bought a couple of colts at the parish fair, and gave the lads each one. Heathcliff took the handsomest, but it soon fell lame, and when he discovered it, he said to Hindley, "You must exchange horses with me. I don't like mine, and if you won't, I shall tell your father of the 3 thrashings you've given me this week, and show him my arm, which is black to the shoulder." And this is a behavior that he takes into his adulthood and exhibits when he realizes that he won't have Catherine the way that he wants to. After the passing of their father, things get exceptionally worse for Heathcliff. I can kind of understand the people who think of Heathcliff as a sympathetic character. I don't think his actions erase the abuse that he goes throughout his life, especially at the hands of Hindley. Heathcliff feels as though he's been cheated out of the life that he should have had, which is fair. But it also becomes increasingly hard to remember that as the story goes on and we watch Heathcliff destroy the lives of everyone else around him. And now let's talk about Catherine. Catherine is meant to be this well-bred young woman who, because of her upbringing and her station in life, is not allowed to be with Heathcliff. That's at least how Wuthering Heights is marketed. But is that really what happens? If we look at the scene where Catherine is telling Nellie that Edgar has asked her to marry him, we see that Catherine struggles to tell Nellie why she wants to marry Edgar at all. "Why do you love him, Miss Cathy?" "Nonsense, I do. That's sufficient." "By no means. You must say why." "Well, because he is handsome and pleasant to be with." "Bad," was my commentary. "And because he is young and cheerful." "Bad still." "And because he loves me." "Indifferent, coming there." "And he will be rich, and I shall like to be the greatest woman of the neighborhood, and I shall be proud of having such a husband." And then later, Nellie says, "You love Mr. Edgar because he is handsome and young and cheerful and rich and loves you. The last, however, goes for nothing. You would love him without that, probably, and with it you wouldn't, unless he possessed the 4 former attractions." They continue to go back and forth, and eventually Catherine reveals that the man that she truly loves is Heathcliff. But she explains that she can never marry Heathcliff because it would degrade her. "It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him. And that, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning, or frost from fire." In this situation, and in a lot of situations in this book, the actions, to me, spoke louder than words. Catherine feels as though she and Heathcliff are the same, that their souls are the very same. She admits that she truly loves Heathcliff, but it's obvious that she doesn't want to be like Heathcliff. She wants to be like Edgar. She wants to marry Edgar because she believes that he will give her the life that she deserves. Later in the scene, Nellie asks Catherine how Heathcliff will feel about being separated from her. As soon as you become Mrs. Linton, he loses friend and love and all. Have you considered how you'll bear the separation, and how he'll bear to be quite deserted in the world? He, quite deserted? We separated, she exclaimed with an accent of indignation. Who is to separate us, pray? They'll meet the fate of Milo. Not as long as I live, Ellen. For no mortal creature. Every Linton on the face of the earth might melt into nothing before I could consent to forsake Heathcliff. It becomes pretty clear that Catherine has no intention of letting go of Heathcliff. She wants it all. When we look at all of this as a big picture, the way these kids were raised, the examples they had of love and care, the anger and resentment of Heathcliff, the selfishness of Catherine, it becomes clear that neither one of them is truly capable of love. Now, this is usually where people will push back, because yes, Heathcliff and Catherine sound like they're deeply in love. Their language is intense, emotional, deliberately overwhelming. But here's the problem. Their words and their actions are never aligned. And we see this happen multiple times in the story. Another example of this is when Catherine takes ill and Heathcliff comes to visit her. And it's a very emotional, heart-wrenching scene. You teach me how cruel you've been, cruel and false. Why did you despise me? Why did you betray your own heart, Cathy? I have not one word of comfort. You deserve this. You have killed yourself. Yes, you may kiss me and cry and wring out my kisses and tears. They'll blight you. They'll damn you. You loved me. Then what right did you have to leave me? What right? Answer me. For the poor fancy you felt for Linton. Because misery and degradation and death and nothing that God or Satan could inflict would have parted us. You, of your own will, did it. I have not broken your heart. You have broken it. And in breaking it, you have broken mine. Their language is explosive. They talk about being unable to live without each other, about souls being bound together, about love as something violent, consuming, and eternal. But if we look at what's actually happening in this scene, it's not mutual care. It's emotional escalation. Catherine is physically fragile, and Heathcliff doesn't calm her. He agitates her. He wants her to feel as deeply and painfully as he does. Love, even tragic love, involves some desire for the other person to be well. Heathcliff doesn't want Catherine to be well. He wants her to be bound to him in suffering. And this is the pattern throughout the novel. Their language is absolute, always, forever, only, but their behavior is selfish and destructive and consistently harmful. So if Wuthering Heights is not a love story, what is it? At its core, Wuthering Heights is about how abuse and neglect are passed on through generations, and how environment, not bloodlines, determines who people become. Mr. Earnshaw brings Heathcliff home with no plan or protection. He doesn't prepare Heathcliff for the hostility of his home. He doesn't even think about it. He doesn't think about how bringing home a stranger would affect his other children either. He doesn't bother to teach Hindley how to process his emotions, his jealousy, his anger without violence. He mostly just tells Catherine and Hindley that they're terrible children while praising Heathcliff and favoring Heathcliff, but he never actually parents Heathcliff either. Their mother is no help either because she's also racist towards Heathcliff, and then she passes away pretty quickly. Nellie also helps raise the children, but she herself is practically a child. I think she's like 14 years old when Heathcliff comes to live with them. So these children are brought up with no direction and are pretty much left to figure out their own problems and emotions on their own. This neglect allows Hindley's cruelty to emerge, and that translates into abuse for Heathcliff. It's for this reason that when Heathcliff comes back after his mysterious 3-year disappearance, he plans to get revenge on Hindley. Through his own experiences, Heathcliff learns to replicate the cruelty that was done to him. He marries Edgar's sister to get revenge against Edgar and Catherine, and he treats his new wife terribly. Hindley eventually dies, and his son Hareton becomes Heathcliff's ward, and Heathcliff deliberately keeps Hareton uneducated and powerless. Heathcliff eventually gets guardianship of his own son Linton, who doesn't escape his cruelty either. And not only is he neglected, he's also mentally and verbally abused by Heathcliff. He also manipulates Edgar and Catherine's daughter, Cathy, into marrying Linton, mostly for power, but also for that last act of revenge. Eventually, we see that cruelty pass on to Linton and Hareton as well. Linton learns to become very good at emotional manipulation and often uses it against Kathy to get her to come to Wuthering Heights or to write to him when she's been expressly told not to do either of those things. Hareton also becomes cruel and violent under the abuse of Heathcliff. He loses control of his temper often, and that causes him to lash out at the people around him, either emotionally or physically. In this novel, abuse is learned behavior, not innate evil. Hindley never learns how to control his emotions and becomes volatile. Heathcliff, being a product of abuse, mostly at the hands of Hindley, turns around and makes everyone around him suffer for it. And each of those people, in turn, become cruel in their own ways. But this cycle doesn't continue forever, because Hareton is given something Heathcliff never was, the chance to be seen differently. I want to be clear. I don't think Wuthering Heights is a bad novel. I actually think it's brilliant, but it's brilliant because it's uncomfortable. It refuses to give us a neat love story or a redemptive arc that makes the suffering feel worthwhile. When we stop reading this book as a romance, we can finally see what it's doing, showing how neglect hardens into cruelty, how abuse repeats itself, and how environment can shape people far more than blood ever could. Heathcliff isn't a romantic hero, and Catherine isn't a tragic ideal. They're the consequences of a world that failed them early and often, and that's why the ending matters. It gives Hareton and Kathy something different. Not perfect happiness, obviously, and not some epic doomed passion, but the possibility of kindness and education and choice. I think about this book constantly. These are just my opinions. If you feel differently, that's okay. I'm always open to discussion, so please feel free to leave a comment below and tell me what you think, if you agree or if you disagree. I'm always excited to hear from the community. If you have watched up to this point, I am so grateful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.